Hello and welcome to another episode of the Orthodox Logos. My name is Ian Silver. I'm here with my co-host, as usual, Nathaniel Harmon.
Greetings.
And today we are going to be talking about the Holy New Martyrs of Optina, something that Nathan is pretty familiar with, more familiar than me, but it's a very heart-wrenching story. It's something that is recent, within the 90s, 93, I believe.
Yeah.
And it's a good reminder of why...
It's actually coming up right on 29 years ago. 29 years ago. It was 1993 Pascha, so we are a week and a half out of the 29-year anniversary.
Yeah, and I think it's just a good reminder why the Orthodox take our faith so seriously and why we defend it with our lives, and, why we also, sometimes it may not seem like we're as charitable to other denominations, not that we're a denomination at all, but, other churches or to people that have, opposing views or ones that want to infiltrate our children's minds or the world we live in.
It's an even broader theme than that, I think. So for anyone who's listened to, say, Pageau or some of these other guys, and hopefully you're listening to Pageau over us because he's significantly smarter. But one of the things that needs to be addressed is this whole notion that this idea of an Enlightenment style playing field where there's a free dialogue of ideas is patently absurd. If someone is engaging in a different religious praxis than we are, so for instance, Muslims are a really good example, right? I don't really bear ill will towards Muslims. However, Muslim Americans and Orthodox Christian Americans do not partake in the same culture. Muslims, and I'm not saying this in the sense of, oh yeah, you grew up Muslim and you do some of the Muslim things, but if you grew up, you're a devout Muslim, you grew up, you're a devout Orthodox Christian, you're not participating in the same culture. And treating these ideas like they're equal is not the way we need to engage with this. You don't give ground to people who, I won't say people. You don't give ground to the worship of demons, period. Right? In ancient Israel, that happened. We saw how that turned out. It wasn't really good. So,
yeah, people tend to even forget, like I mentioned earlier, about like some of the most basic things in the Bible, like the flood, or
right.
Other things.
It happened because of a demonically inspired culture.
Yeah, which
right.
We're seeing nowadays, and especially like we've mentioned before with the transgender movement or transhumanism in general. The LGBTQ community pushing their agenda on our children.
Well, you want to take it further back. The idea that democracy and the cult of the individual and the cult of reason is good. Yeah. These are very bad. Like, I've said it many times, maybe not on this podcast, but in other venues, other milieus, I guess. The Enlightenment that we in the United States and in the West in general look back to as being this awesome thing is the same Enlightenment that produced socialism, communism, industrialism. Like, these are the reason that these movements happened and turned out the way they did is because they drank from the same poisoned well, right? And if we go back to that well and just say, well, if we go further upstream, surely it will be cleaner. If we go a little bit further up than Adam Smith, surely things will be cleaner. It's like, well, he's drinking from the same well that Stalin was.
Yeah, so, that water has been polluted.
Right.
So
that in mind, we're going to talk about sorry, go ahead.
No, yeah, and it kind of just, we're not going to dwell on this too much or speak on it too much, but we had a little backlash from the Patreon TikTok video, our pagan TikTok reaction video. We've decided to do things in a different way. And we understand some of the concern, but I think, not necessarily this story, coincides with it, but the aspect of the people that we were reacting to, whether or not people felt it was charitable, these are the same people who commit heinous acts against Orthodox Christians, monks, And like Columbine, there was multiple people that were killed, but there's one story of a girl who was asked twice if she was Christian, and upon not denying Christ the second time, had a gun put to her head and shot, killed.
Right.
So, there's people who claim to be Satanists, atheists, pagans, whatever they are, and they're willing to pick up arms against us and slay us, in the name of their false gods. So I think it's important for us to remember these things.
And something that also needs to be considered as well is, like Ian and I have said before, we're not saying that these people are bad per se, right? What we're saying is they are serving the enemies of God, right? In the same way that we do when we sin, but more aggressively. Right?
Or in the same way that we used to in our previous to Orthodoxy.
Like Ian. Ian was a
pagan,
straight up pagan, right?
I hate when you say it like that.
but I mean,
I could have been one of those TikTok reaction videos.
Right. Well, these people are enslaved to the enemies of God, right? And we ought to try to save them. There was a... Did you ever listen... And you're going to be utterly shocked that I can make this reference. But did you ever listen to Flyleaf?
I know, yes.
Okay, do you remember the album Memento Mori? I believe it came out in 2000.
Yeah, early 2000s.
2010.
Well, I guess it
was like 2009.
Yeah. I know what you're talking about.
Okay, so that album, the whole... It was actually a really good album. It was one of the only ones that contained a number of songs from them that I liked back in the day. But one of the cool things about that album was it actually set up a pretty good picture of what, for Protestants anyway, of what the spiritual world looks like. And that is, when you become a Christian, when you decide to serve Christ, you are drafted into the army of God and you are fighting the enemy. And your goal is not to kill the other foot soldiers. Your goal is to save them and pull them into your ranks.
Yeah.
But you're fighting the people who stand on the other, the powers who stand behind them.
Yeah, we're not fighting, like in the TikTok reaction videos, we're more so reacting to the demons that live within these people, the ailments that they're afflicted with, which we've all been afflicted with. So it's not out of disrespect for the human. We still value them as a human. We love them. In liturgy and in our personal time, we pray for the whole world. That's what the monastics do. So I think people just, they see something... They look at, like, the outer layer of it and they say, oh, you're making fun of these people. No, we're mocking the devil. We're mocking the demons. So, I mean, that's just the way I think of it.
That is at least the goal.
Yeah.
Yeah. But so, let's move into this discussion on the Holy New Martyrs of Optina. This, if you're not familiar with this story, and as far as I've come across, very few, I won't say very few, not very many of the American Orthodox that I've come across are familiar with this story.
Unless you've subscribed to Death to the World, or, you're really deep into some of the history of the recent Orthodox Church.
Right. These guys are like of the same generation as the martyr Father Daniel Sasoyev, right? Obviously that happened almost 20 years later. Happened in 2009, 2010, 2009.
Yeah. We'll do a discussion on that at some point. Right. And obviously, real quick, shout out to Death to the World and Father John Valdez. We're going to be doing a discussion soon. I look forward to that, and I'm sure it'll be edifying. So this is an article from the Death to the World website. It was in one of their issues, I believe issue 19. So we're going to read from this, maybe a few other sources. But yeah, quick shout out. Make sure to support local Orthodox artists in general. I think it's important to remember that.
And start making Orthodox art as well.
Yeah.
If you're a writer, if you can draw, if you can sing, learn to chant.
Yeah, talk to your spiritual father. It's you'll notice at the beginning of this video and all of our videos from now on, we've put a disclaimer mentioning that we are just Orthodox laity and seek guidance from your spiritual fathers. Everything that we talk about is just from our experience, and we're here to learn and grow with you guys as well. So
also, we do have a blessing from our spiritual father, whom we share to do this.
Yeah. So with that being said...
That doesn't mean we speak authoritatively, though. Like I said, go talk to your spiritual father. If we say, do X, Y, or Z thing...
Then that's a red flag.
Well, it may be a red flag depending on what it is, but before you apply that to your life, ask your spiritual father.
Yeah. So, Nathan, if you can see that well enough, I know your eyes are giving out. Sorry, people can't see you look at me like that, but they could feel it.
You can.
Yeah.
You could hear that head turn.
Yeah. So this is an article from Death to the World, and
Okay.
We'll go ahead and start.
Okay, the Holy New Martyrs of Optina. In 1917, the Russian Revolution and the rise of communism resulted in the deaths of millions of believers and destroyed countless churches and monasteries. Optina Monastery, once the center of true spirituality for the entire region, was initially spared, but not for long. In 1938, the last abbot was executed by the communists, and the monastery was shut down. Its lands were taken by peasant farmers, and its beautiful cathedral was turned into a state museum. It stood silently decaying, awaiting its own resurrection. Just before the fall of communism, Optina was returned to the church, and many of its former starets were glorified officially as saints. The monastery began to rebuild and is flourishing once again today. Hieromonk Vasily was born Igor Roslyakov. He spent the years after high school working in an automobile factory before entering the Moscow University for journalism. He received a master's degree in sports and was a qualified newspaper journalist. Later, he married and subsequently divorced with no children. Like many graduates today, though he was academically distinguished, he lacked direction. Modern life seemed to have no purpose. In 1984, he embraced the ancient Christian faith of Russia and began to attend the divine services in the Epiphany Cathedral regularly. His devotion grew daily. He could always be found standing in the same spot in every service near the icon of Saint Vasily. In 1988, Igor moved into the Optina Monastery, which was still in ruins. After he was tonsured a monk and raised to the priesthood, he was given the name Vasily, after Saint Basil. He and the few brothers there began to rebuild Optina and to restore the holy place to its former physical and spiritual glory. Those at the monastery with him can remember tears in his eyes at every Easter service. Many people, pilgrims and monks alike, noticed something special in Father Vasily. He became a wise spiritual father to many who remembered his deep, otherworldly compassion. Once, some of the faithful asked him, "Father, do you have a special sacred wish?" "Yes," he answered. "I would like to die at Easter to the chiming of the bells." Everyone knew Father Vasily as a counselor, wise beyond his years. A self-sacrificing priest who would go the extra mile for his spiritual children, he had great faith in God and was devoted to the saints. What they didn't expect was for him to receive the death he had wished for. Leonid Tartanikov was born in a small village in 1957. As a baby, people thought he was sick because he cried so often. When he was baptized at age 2, he stopped immediately and became healthy. All the local girls loved him as he grew into a handsome youth, and one famously tried to use witchcraft to put a spell on him, telling him, "You'll be mine or no one else's." But Leonid simply ignored the girls in general and concentrated on his studies. He was known never to touch alcohol, instead focusing on learning, earning the nickname Bookworm.
After college, he enrolled in the Red Army. Once his service was complete, Leonid had a variety of odd jobs: a sailor, horse breeder, photographer, and even a shoemaker. He studied dance, martial arts intensely, once even being offered a contract to be a professional dancer. He could still do the splits without any effort into his 30s. Still, he was empty inside. Soon in his search for answers, he began to go to the local church, and on the Feast of Pentecost in 1990, Leonid, who now called himself Alexei, finally received an answer to his prayers. He had a vision and immediately dropped everything to become a monk, buying a one-way ticket to Optina Monastery, and at the station, his ticket and passport were stolen, but that did not stop him. Using whatever means necessary, including walking most of the distance on foot, he reached the monastery in just a month and a half. At the age of 36, he was tonsured and became monk Trophim. Trophim worked hard at the monastery. After Optina had been shut down by the communist authorities, the farmers tried in vain to get the monastery's land to grow anything. When the monks returned to Optina, it began to bear fruit again. Monk Trophim himself would help the local villagers, especially the elderly, plant their potatoes, and they marveled that wherever he had worked, the plants were completely healthy. In all the surrounding gardens, Colorado beetles infested everything, but where Monk Trophim had labored, there couldn't be found even one beetle. Local farmers even came to the monastery asking the monks what prayers Father Trophim had been saying over the gardens, hoping to help their own crops. He worked other obediences, taking on extra work voluntarily. With prayer as his only training, he was an adept bell ringer, tractor operator, receptionist, house painter, baker, clerk, and worked in the forge. The monk Trophim labored in asceticism, eating very little and sleeping even less. Instead, he devoted his hours to prayer, making prostrations before the icon of the Mother of God. In spite of his labor and the harsh treatment of his body, he was never sick and seemed never to be the least bit tired. For the first and last week of Great Lent, it was discovered later he would eat nothing at all. sustaining himself only through prayer. But somehow near the end of his life, he began to walk slowly and to seem weary when he had never been weary before, as though he knew he was not long for this earth. And there was much to do before the end.
Vladimir Pushkarev was born in 1955 in a blighted village, where most of the men broke their back cutting lumber for pennies and broke their spirits in poverty, drinking away what little they could earn. No one was baptized, and the nearest church could only be reached from that place by plane, which was impossible to afford. Vladimir attended school and found his way out of the small town through the army, where he served beyond the compulsory years. During this time, he learned the Eastern art of warfare. Like the young Leonid Tatarnikov, he hardened his body through intense physical training. After his service, he worked as a lumberjack in Baikal. He never drank or smoked, and though he was respected, some people considered him a sorcerer because of his natural inclinations toward the spiritual, and the occult nature of the Eastern martial arts he was practicing. While in the forest, an old man appeared to Vladimir in the taiga and gave him a book about magic. The old man said he would meet Vladimir on the same spot 1 year later. Though Vladimir didn't return to meet the old man again, he did perform magical tricks to amuse the local girls. He would send some into the forest and told them to write a note, and would tell them what they had written about from a distance. Soon, however, the fun would end, and when Vladimir experienced his own death through his practice of magic, his soul separated from his body and traveled to a kingdom of terror. Suddenly an angel appeared before him and offered to send him back, but only if he agreed to go to church afterwards. After that, Vladimir immediately devoted himself to God, moving from that region, where there was no church, to the Rostov-on-Don, where he got a job tending the yard at the cathedral, devoted to the birth of the Theotokos. His selfish way of life was completely reversed as he labored and fasted, eating only crackers and prosphora with a little holy water for the entire fast. He began to ravel on holidays all around the region, visiting monasteries and hoping to find one to stay in. He was hired in Kiev and worked cleaning toilets in the cathedral when the bishop gave his blessing and recommended that he go to Optina. Vladimir arrived in Optina on foot and was tonsured with the name Therapont. He quickly devoted himself to his labor, becoming a skilled woodcarver, making crosses for the brothers. In all things he became devoted to God, crucifying his passions through obedience and prayer. After the monks had finished all the prayers for the day, many noticed that monk Therapont would continue to pray long into the night. Once, one of the brothers decided to secretly count how many bows he made during the night, but as hard as he tried, he fell asleep long before Father Therapont finished his prayers.
Once a man who doubted the existence of God came to the monastery by accident, and at last he believed. He explained to the church warden, "I saw here how one monk was praying," he said. "I saw the face of an angel talking with the Lord. Do you know that angels are among you?" "What angels?" asked the surprised warden. The visitor turned and pointed at monk Therapont, who had walked out of the church at that moment. The hierodeacon who lived with Therapont in the cell related that before the death of Therapont he did not sleep at all, praying all the night and only found rest while bending over a chair. Moreover, during all of Passion Week, he did not eat a bite. In 1993, monks Trophim, Therapont, and Father Vasily had been fasting with all of the brothers during Passion Week, anticipating Pascha, the glorious service, a celebration of the resurrection of Christ. In Optina, at Pascha, there is a procession from the monastery to the skeet of St. John the Baptist, which is some distance east of the monastery proper. Over 10,000 pilgrims were present for Pascha. After the liturgy, the monks all went to the refectory to break the fast. After the meal, two of the bell ringers, monks Therapont and Trophim, returned to the bell tower to continue the Easter peal, ringing the resurrection of Christ. At 6:10, the bell ringing became uneven and suddenly stopped completely.
A man named Nikolai Averin, an admitted Satanist, had climbed into the belfry and stabbed Therapont with a knife. He died instantly. Monk Trophim shouted, "God have mercy on us," before he too was stabbed. Rising to ring the bell, he yelled, "Help," and fell down, giving up his spirit. Having committed the murder, Averin slipped the edge of the monks' robes to their heads and pulled their klobouks over their faces. The murderer quickly fled towards the skeet, where Hieromonk Vasily was also going in order to hear confessions. The criminal stabbed him in the back, then climbed over the monastery wall and threw away his self-made knife. According to the police, it was double-edged, 5 centimeters wide, and resembled a sword. It was engraved on its blade with 666 and Satan. Averin had stabbed the God-fearing monks, now martyrs, in the back. According to the investigator, the injuries were inflicted with unusual professionalism and deliberately. They were not too deep to make the victim bleed to death over a long time. In spite of a terrible wound, Hieromonk Vasily lived longer than the others. He looked at the people surrounding him and even tried to rise. He was also brought to the cathedral and was put next to the relics of St. Ambrose before he was taken by ambulance to the local hospital in Kozelsk. There he soon passed away. Many investigators wondered how this man could overpower the 2 monks in the belfry. Monk Trophim was so strong he was able to tie a fire poker into a knot with his bare hands. Father Vasily, before becoming a monk, had been one of the best water polo players in the USSR. His reaction time was described as stunning, and he too was extremely powerful. Monk Therapont had been a master of martial arts in his former life. Also, the belfry was so small that many noted it was impossible for a stranger to get in unnoticed.
It was clear to all the monks and all the faithful that the monks had borne their martyrdom with bravery. The martyrs couldn't requite violence using violence. It was their last temptation. A real monk must never bloody his hands. All became slowly aware that by the time the martyrs had been prepared for death. They had foreseen the glory of martyrdom prepared for them. According to many witnesses, Monk Trophim had often recently spoken that he had little time left. Half a year or a year. While Therapont, once a silent monk, began asking everybody to pray for him. Also, all of the monks began to give away their few possessions before their murder, including their personal tools, telling others that they would not need them anymore, even though at the time there were so few tools in the monastery that many had to get tools sent from their former homes or ask friends to bring them. And so the newly reopened Optina, which in centuries past had given the world many saints, now gave up 3 martyrs. Their faith in God and love for all did not die with their murders, however. Averin killed monks Therapont and Trophim while they were announcing to the world the resurrection of Christ. Hieromonk Vasily was killed when he was going to the skete to hear confessions, but all faithful Orthodox Christians know that death is not the end, but the beginning. The world lost 3 faithful monks, but the faithful have gained 3 heavenly intercessors who achieved what they had struggled for and reached the pinnacle of perfection, having the martyr's crown. While we ourselves may or may not be chosen for martyrdom, we should imitate these holy martyrs and heed their call to be ready. For as we have heard, suddenly the judge shall come, and the deeds of each shall be revealed. Therefore, let us glorify their martyrdom, and remember the words of the gospel. If he comes suddenly, do not let him find you sleeping. What I say to you, I say to everyone, watch.
O holy new martyrs of Optina, pray to God for us.
Amen.
That's the first time you've read their life, Ian. What do you think?
It's rough, man. Honestly.
I came across that hagiography, oh man, probably in early 2019, I guess, so 3 years ago. And it's quite interesting. One of the things that is not mentioned in this article is, I believe it was Father Therapont was a rather skilled wood carver, as is mentioned. But he would often carve the pectoral or even the baptismal crosses for people. And the last one he carved, like, you know, he did beautiful work. And the last one that he carved, he spent a long time on, and he talked to other people about it and said, I don't know what's wrong with this. I've done so many of these, but this one feels like I'm carving myself. It was right before he died. And like the article does mention as well, all of the monks through various, it was his recollection of their martyrdom was occurring. It became known that's That's a good icon.
But, yeah, it is the resurrection, so could have left that one up.
But they all knew that their martyrdoms were coming, which is quite impressive. I don't know, Ian, do you have anything you'd like to say? There's a lot we can talk about in there, I think.
Yeah, I think...
And I have some personal recollections to share as well.
I think one of the things that I took from it, obviously, there's a lot, but at the end, from the gospel, if he comes suddenly, do not let him find you sleeping. And also, you know, to be ready and defend the faith. I think that's something that goes without saying, but a lot of us, you know, we sometimes find ourselves being okay with things going on in the world and not standing up for it and not exposing the darkness or or things
Right.
that are happening around us, because it's easy just to sit back and say, oh, well, it's not affecting anybody. It's not affecting me. But I don't think people realize it's, as we mentioned earlier, it's polluting the well that our children are going to be drinking from. So
We have to be. So one of the things that I notice with modern culture, and one of the reasons why I suspect so many people like Marvel films and stuff like that, just that genre generally speaking, is because we all would like to see ourselves as the hero, right? No one, there's a reason why movies that take the side of the bad guy in a non satirical fashion don't generally do well. Like there has to be some heroic aspect. Like a good example of how you can't really tell a story about a truly bad guy and have it be awesome is the story or the movie Megamind, right? Which
yeah,
I think is
the Pixar one or whatever.
I forget who did it. It came out a number of years ago. But that's a really good example of this because the whole point of that is Megamind can't even abide being a bad guy.
Yeah.
Like he's not even a truly evil character, right? And it's not even that he's misunderstood. He does things that are bad, but then he discovers that that's not actually what gives him any kind of purpose. He actually has to stand for something, right? And so he becomes the hero. So it's a hero's journey, right? The problem is, and this goes back to what we've said about Saint David and Saint Patrick in a previous episode. If you want to be given the large things, the glorious things, you have to do the little things, right? You have to pray. You have to serve others, right? And that's honestly quite difficult to do, And I mean, we see here the reward for that being martyrdom. And even as an Orthodox Christian, like it's hard to look at that as something that I desire for myself or that I desire for people around me. I would honor and respect them greatly if they were martyred, but it's hard to want.
Yeah.
Sorry
about that yelping noise. My little communist chihuahua decided to chime in on it with his opinion, which I'm sure holds no merit.
It was probably disagreeable, especially given what we're talking about.
Yeah, I lost my train of thought.
Doing the little things.
Yeah, doing the little things, but yeah, I'm gonna share a few images, and I had something I wanted to say before my dog yelped and scared me.
You were scared of a diminutive chihuahua.
Pretty much.
Wow.
Okay, what I was gonna say is that with the murderer, there's a video that we're gonna attach at the end, and they mentioned something in there about sometimes these people don't even necessarily realize that after these things are said and done, that they have to stand before the face of God. And I think that's pretty powerful. People say they hate Christians or they want to do these types of things. And sometimes they do, but I don't think they realize what that actually means after it's been done. So,
Well, this actually ties into a video we're going to release, or not release, but we're going to record on Friday. There's a movie that just came out called The Northman. And Ian hasn't seen it yet. I've seen it. I won't spoil too much about it, but one of the things in that film that's really interesting and that I've actually come to realize is far more endemic than I initially had realized is this idea, the dissolution of this idea that paganism or anti-Christianity and the advent of doing whatever you want to do as long as you're not hurting anyone is going away. And people are beginning to slowly realize that when Christianity, although I don't even think many of them could explain it, but the notion is slowly starting to capture their hearts that when Christianity goes away, or as its power over the culture recedes in some areas, the world doesn't turn into Woodstock.
Yeah.
The world turns into a brutish, nasty, vicious, demon-infested place.
It's not a utopia.
Yeah, and that's kind of what the Northman...
It's quite the opposite.
That's what the Northman shows, and that's kind of what we see here. You don't get to live in an atheist milieu and do the atheist things and avoid God and then foster hatred in your heart to God and to not have that affect the way you interact with other people. It may not be something as crazy as murdering 3 monks, but
God
it might be
forbid.
worse. I mean, lest we forget, the Columbine shooters were very much involved in the 1990s American version of this. And they killed, I wanted to say it was 16. No, how many people died at Columbine? I forget.
I don't know the exact, a lot.
I mean, I should
And
know.
they
I was like 20 miles away from it when it happened.
and they targeted Christians. That was one of their goals. That was like one of their main goals, you know. They blamed, obviously people blamed like that type of stuff on Marilyn Manson. I'm not saying he had anything to do with it, but it's
The zeitgeist he embraced did.
yeah, it's a sign of the times, and you know, we're still seeing things like that. I mean, we haven't had anything like Columbine per se, but I mean, you know what I mean? Like that was like I felt like that was a direct attack on Christians. They went to that school and they asked numerous people if they believed in God and executed them in front of other people. So I think
Yeah.
it's pretty intense. Anything else that you can pull from that?
So I'll tell a story briefly about Father Vasily. So like I said, I guess it was early 2019 or mid 2019 that I discovered these saints, and who have not yet been glorified, but will be soon, God willing. But the so I used to work in a hospital, right? I believe I've mentioned that once or twice. And one morning at the end of a shift when I was working in the hospital I used to work in, I was having a really, really, really bad day. Like it wasn't even that it was exceptionally bad. I just wasn't dealing with anything well, and I was really, really hacked off. No one could do anything and not acquire my irritation. Like, and it wasn't even irritation. I was legit angry. And I was saying the Jesus prayer, like trying to get a hold on my anger because that's a vice of which I'm quite fond. And I was trying to get a hold of it and dial it back and, you know, get it squared away. And nothing was happening. So eventually I was so frustrated that I just randomly said, Father Vasily, if you're bold before the throne of God, please intercede for me because I don't know what else to do. And I, at that point, just kind of, I don't even remember if I went back to praying the Jesus prayer. I just kind of stopped because I was so worn out. It's like, I'm emotionally done. I don't know what else to do. And if this doesn't do anything, then I don't know what to do. And I don't honestly think that I expected anything to happen. But a couple of minutes later, and like for anyone who's been in a hospital before, there are particular sights, sounds, and smells that belong there and others that don't. Right? Unequivocally don't. And so I'm sitting there still working, still stewing in my fury. All of a sudden I smell something that doesn't belong. I was like, what the heck is this? And it took me another like 30 or 45 seconds to figure out what it was. I'm like, what on earth is this? And I realized it was myrrh. Like someone was walking around the lab, sensing the lab. And I have seldom experienced such a turn in my attitude and in my emotional and spiritual state. Like, I won't say I was immediately joyous. I was very confused and then a little bit frightened. But I mean, it was very much like Father Vasily was there sensing the lab, or at least sensing where I was. So, needless to say, I have a lot of, well, I won't say a lot, I don't have enough devotion to them, but I am very fond of these monks, these martyrs.
Yeah, there's also, I mean, with the guidance of your spiritual father, there's the Optina prayer rule, which is a pretty intense prayer rule. I mean, it's nothing like super crazy. It's a long one, though. It's like 500 repetitions of the Jesus prayer, and then prayers to the saints, prayers to the Mother of God. You know, that's something you could look into with some guidance. It's unfortunately, it's not something I've ever been able to get all the way through, but I think it just shows the dedication that these monks who died for their faith had. And there's also some interesting things, like looking back, there was that incident or where, you know, monk Therapont said he didn't need his clothes anymore. And on Easter, the eve of Easter, Pascha, he distributed his carpentry tools, etc., etc. And then on the eve of Easter, he was in a state of radiant joy, having received from the Lord the gift of enlightenment and foresight, pretty much knowing that this was going to be the night that he would lose his life. And then on Easter night, before the murder, Monk Therapont was standing in the church, not in his usual place, but near a table where services for the repose of the souls are usually conducted. He stood as if he was immobile, his head bowed in prayer and sorrow. There were a great many people in the church, and he was being shoved and crowded, yet he seemed to notice nothing. Then he set off for the last confession of his life, and this is when the Satanist struck him with a ritual knife. Together with monk Trophim, he was chiming the bells. So I think that's just like crazy, the type of foresight they had, or the clairvoyance that they had, knowing or even wanting to die martyrs, and that they had fulfilled their life mission of martyrdom. It's not something that we all get to achieve. It's not something that a lot of us want to achieve, but I think it's something that we should be ready for, and something that we should, take seriously, especially as Orthodox Christians. It's not something we take lightly. Our martyrs are what have kept the church, the way they are for a long time.
This ties into another story, very brief and actually fairly recent, on Pascha, the eve of Pascha, actually. I was hanging out with Ian before the resurrection service started. I was over at his house because it's closer to the church than mine.
Yeah, not because he wanted to hang out.
Right, well, I slept. Well, I won't say I slept. I rested for a little while. But one of the interesting things there that was actually almost, you might recall this, but it's been informed by these stories. In Arizona, you don't need to have a permit to carry a handgun, right? Concealed.
Yeah.
And that has some other ramifications as well. But, Ian said something like, oh yeah, I wonder if I should kit out before we go to church, because, we're going to be downtown in the middle of the night, and that's not necessarily the best place to be per se.
Yeah, and it's not somewhere we usually are. And
Right.
I know that, not to get into things, but I know we're safe at our parish, and I don't feel the need to do
Right.
certain things. But this one, I was feeling a little weird that night.
Yeah, and he said, do you think I ought to kit out? And this was definitely not me speaking from my mind, but I hope the Holy Spirit speaking, or inspiring, or something, because it wasn't my wisdom at all, because I'm Ian knows my inclinations, I'll put it that way.
But I will tell you were right, and as soon as you said it, I realized,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But-
So what did you say to me?
But yeah, he said, should I kit out? And I said, well, I can't think of a better time to die than in church on Pascha.
Yeah. Not that
And-
it's something, I don't want to say not something you want, but it's not something not even something you're looking forward to. It's kind of a weird thing to think about,
I don't say that having anything resembling Father Vasily's fervor, saying, I would like to die on Pascha, hearing the ringing of the bells. I am certainly not that devoted of a man.
Yeah.
But I would like to be. And that has influenced the way I view a lot of things over the years. That quote, at least.
Yeah. So yeah, I ended up not bringing a gun to Pascha for everybody. And I don't think I really would have, but it was a thought in my head, like, are we going to be safe downtown? There's a lot of people that don't like what we're doing. But then I realized, as Nathan was saying it, there would be no better time
In no better place.
and no better place. So yeah, with that being said, we do have some videos releasing this week, a few more interviews scheduled. And on Friday, we plan on doing a Northman movie review and kind of looking at some of the symbolism in it, how we can look at it from a Christian point of view, how we can't, what they meant by it. And Nathan probably has some ideas on that. So
I'll say this, kind of previewing what we're going to talk about, and I expect Ian's going to agree with me. It was one of the best movies that I've seen out of Hollywood in a while.
wow,
And that's terrifying.
really,
Yes.
nothing really.
It's scary and it's frightening that was done so well, because it indicates a lot of things that we'll discuss later, but things
Cool.
that make me very uncomfortable.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. Yeah, make sure to like and subscribe. And for our Patreon members, we'll have some videos coming this week, this month, obviously, quite a few. Make sure to become a Patreon member. It helps out. It helps,
You get access to cool stuff.
yeah, stuff that other people don't get to see. And it really just helps out with us being able to create more. And one of the things I wanted to address about that is we want to be able to continue creating and learning. I learned a lot today. I always do when we do these videos. So I think if we don't have to work 7 days a week and we can channel our energy into glorifying God, hopefully, and edifying ourselves and others, I think that's the main reason the Patreon or other subscription services are good for not just ourselves, but, you know, Jonathan Pajot. There's a bunch of people that I think you should support on Patreon other than us. But if you feel called to prayerfully and you want to support us with a couple bucks a month, please do so. We would appreciate it.
And as much as we do joke about, oh, you're buying a bottle of wine or a cup of coffee, that's actually not what's going on. Ian does have to pay for site hosting fees, gear, and software and stuff like that. And that's not something that I know anything about. It's expensive and it's hard to do. And also that helps me out with resources as well. So we talked about on one of the other videos we did recently that will be released, you know, there's projects we've got coming down the pike that are going to require a lot of my time and a lot of resources I don't have. Yeah. And that's what's being paid for with this. So it's not, we're not sitting here trying to do we're not going out to fancy dinners with your money. Yeah. We're not doing the unboxing video stuff and making however many $100,000 a month or a year. Yeah. Like that's not the kind of stuff we're doing. And honestly, I wouldn't want to do that. I mean, I had instant coffee and McDonald's today. You had McDonald's? I just want to be honest with the people. I am judging you so hard right now. I was in a rush and I spent money on books. You just got done with Lent. You can't fast for like 2 hours. Let's go back a few days ago where you had to remind me that Lent was over as I was heating up rice and beans still. That was supremely entertaining. You're like, you know you can have meat. Oh, yes. I'll just finish this rice and beans from a few days ago. Just put some pork in it or something. Jeez. But yeah. Or tuna. So we appreciate the support. And once again, sorry if we've done anything to upset you guys. If our words have made you feel a certain way. We're trying our best to be charitable and to, we say a prayer before we go on here and we ask the Lord to guide us and, hopefully we don't do anything to ruin that. So yeah, God bless you guys. And we'll see you here in a few days. Nathan? God bless. Cheers. Cheers. Christ is risen. Truly he is risen.
Светлой памяти убиенных иеромонаха Василия, инока Тherapонта, инока Трофима посвящает. Плыл над землей пасхальный звон, как избавление от страхов. И вдруг раздался тихий стон клинком пронзенных двух монахов. И вдруг раздался тихий стон клинком пронзенных двух монахов. Спешивший к ним на помощь брат убит ударом той же стали. Теперь они у райских врат пред Господом Господом своим предстали. Теперь они у райских врат пред Господом своим предстали. Какой безжалостной руке дано расправиться над ними, кто 3 шестерки на клинке и дьявольское вывел имя. Кто 3 шестерки на клинке и дьявольское вывел имя. И соблазненный сатаной не ведал в ослеплении диком, что тоже со своей виной он встанет пред Господним ликом, что тоже со своей виной он встанет пред Господним ликом. Что за его душой всегда кровавому тянуться следу, ведь сатанистам никогда не одержать в борьбе победу. Ведь сатанистам никогда не одержать в борьбе победу. Как не стремятся силы зла свернуть людей с дороги к Богу, вновь зазвучат опять колокола, колокола. Другой звонарь забьет тревогу, вновь зазвучат опять колокола, колокола. Другой звонарь забьет во славу Богу. Пусть будет битва нелегка, а речи сатаны лукавы, но нам победу на века несет Христос в сиянии славы. Но нам победу на века несет Христос в сиянии славы. Плыл над землей пасхальный